some of you will remember this. Back in 1986, the NFL made a decision that would change the way the game of football is played. They noticed that there were typically, in the course of a game, some significant calls that the refs made that, shocker here, were not the right calls. And so the refs, in the heat of the moment, in real time, they were doing the best they could, but the rest of us at home, we're watching this play over and over again on our TVs, and we're getting different perspectives and different angles, and we're watching in slow motion, and so the ref got it wrong, but we all knew what the right call was. And so the NFL instituted what's called instant replay. And there are certain plays at certain times in the game where they will review a play that is in question. And the refs will stop the game and they watch the video, and there's somebody up in a video booth that goes through again and again watching the same split-second moment to get the right call. They don't want one blown call to impact the entire game, and so they closely examine it. And then the ref comes out on the field and he flips on his mic, and typically he'll say something like, "After further review," right? "After further review, the ruling on the field stands. We got it right." Or "After further review, the ruling on the field has been overturned." And it changes some things. Well, as we begin this new year, it's an appropriate time for us to do a little instant replay. For us to look back on 2024 and examine some significant moments, some critical decisions, some relationships, to look closely at the path that we're on and to learn from that so that in 2025 we can say, hey, after further review, here are some things that need attention. After further review, here's what's not working, and here's what is working. And we want to be intentional with these critical moments of life. And so this week we're starting a new series called After Further Review. And we're going to examine our lives through the lens of the longest recorded sermon of Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. It's recorded for us in Matthew's Gospel, chapters 5 through 7. And so if you have a Bible there, you can go ahead and turn in your Bible to Matthew chapter 5. One way that we could title the Sermon on the Mount would be Jesus' Vision for Your Life. It seems like a good way to start a new year, you know. Jesus, what's your vision for my life? Or to stick with our football metaphor, God's game plan for your life. God, what is it that you want from me? And as we study this text, I think you'll find that God's going to help you see some things from a different perspective. He's going to help you look at some key areas of your life from a different angle. We'll slow some things down and examine who we are and how we're living through Jesus' vision for our life. And my prayer is that as we study this, you'll say something like, hey, after further review, I've held on to some bitterness and anger in 2024 that's toxic, and I don't want to carry that into 2025. Because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is going to talk to us about the hatred in our hearts. Or maybe you'll say, after further review, I've developed a habit of filling my eyes and my heart with lust, and it's gotten out of control, and it's poison, it's destroying me, and it doesn't honor God. Because Jesus is going to talk to us about lust and sexual sin. Or maybe you'll say, after further review, it's time for me to start being sacrificially generous with my money. Because Jesus is going to talk to us about, storing up for ourselves treasures in heaven instead of storing up for ourselves treasures here on earth. Or maybe you'll say, after further review, my prayer life needs some help. And Jesus is going to talk to us about how we talk to God and the priority of prayer in our lives. Or after further review, I've become judgmental. I've become too critical of others. I don't think there's any sin that's more nauseating to God than spiritual pride, and we have to guard against it. And Jesus is going to talk to us about that. Or Maybe we say after further review, I've been too anxious and too worried, and I need to learn to trust God with each day, just one day at a time. Because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks to us about that. And so as we go through this series, the next few weeks here, my prayer is that we would look closely, that we would have the humility and the courage to examine our hearts and our lives and our relationships and our decisions through the lens of Jesus' vision for our lives. And so in Matthew chapter 5, by the time we get there, Jesus has already called his first disciples. He's already begun teaching in the synagogue, and he's worked some miracles. And so it's no surprise then that large crowds have gathered and they've started to follow Jesus. And that's where we pick things up in verse 1, where it says, "Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down." All right, so now we know why it's called the Sermon on the Mount, because he preached it on a mountainside. He preached it up in the hills. But there's something significant that is being communicated here. It's more than just location. It's what happens in that location. You see, Jesus most likely is going to preach this sermon in the hills above the Sea of Galilee. And this is an area where revolutionaries of the day would go to hide out. And the people would come to them, and the revolutionaries would give their revolutionary message. It was a way to be safe from the Roman occupation. It was a way to be safe from the Jewish leaders. The revolutionaries would hide up in the hills with their revolutionary messages. And so when Jesus is going to teach us here, he doesn't go to the synagogue. Instead, when he gives us his vision for our lives, he goes up into the hills. Because Jesus is a revolutionary, and his message is a revolutionary message. And his message is a threat to the Romans. His message is a threat to the Jewish leaders. And make no mistake about it, this message is a threat to Americans. I mean, there'll be some times as we study this where you're going to have to confront the fact that the vision Jesus has for you is a lot different than maybe the vision that this world has put in you. That God's dream for your life is different than the American dream for your life. And so in chapter 5, verse 1, he goes up onto the mountainside and he sits down. And then verse 2 says, "And he began to teach them." You know, as you go through the Gospels, Jesus is often called Rabbi, which simply means teacher. This is how they thought of him. This is the title they gave him. They would say Rabbi, teacher. And in those days, a rabbi was often the most educated person in the community. And it was the rabbi's job to explain the Torah, to explain scriptures, to interpret the scriptures for the people. There's a name for the rabbi's interpretation. It was called their yoke. Their yoke. And a yoke, of course, was like this wooden halter that would go around the neck of an ox or a large animal as a way to guide them in the field. And so these rabbis, their teaching would be their yoke. It would be what the people would look to guide them, to give them direction. And they would put on the yoke of the rabbi as a way to steer, to direct their lives. But as you would guess, right, there are a lot of different rabbis, and so there were a lot of different yokes, a lot of different interpretations, a lot of different applications. And the people would listen to the different rabbis, and then they would decide, okay, you know, this rabbi, he makes some sense to me, and so I'm going to wear that yoke. Well, what's happening here in the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus is saying, here's my yoke. Here's my yoke. And it was different than any others, right? One of the phrases you'll hear in the Sermon on the Mount, it shows up some 6 times, is the phrase where Jesus says, "You have heard it said," and then he says, "But I tell you." In other words, everybody else says this, but here's what I say. And so he makes a distinction between himself and how other rabbis would teach the word. And maybe a question for us to wrestle with here, even early on, is what yoke is guiding you? What yoke are you wearing? In fact, if you're here, if you're watching and you're not a Christian, and you don't really know about Jesus, and you're not sure about the Bible, and you don't even really want to be, don't even want to have to watch this, but you made a New Year's resolution, and so it's like, church, gym, dentist, and you're going to knock it out, and you're going to start the year strong. And if that's you, I guess this is where I would ask you to start. It's just maybe examine what yoke are you wearing? Who is giving direction to your life? Whose vision are you living out? And you might say, well, no, it's just me. It's mine. No, we're all being influenced. We're all being impacted. Each one of us are being discipled. Whether we intentionally choose it or not, we are all choosing a certain path. And so, what path are you on? What's guiding you? What's giving you direction? And so maybe as you listen to the yoke that Jesus would have for you, maybe you would say, hey, after further review, the yoke that I've been wearing, it's not really working out for me. Or after further review, the yoke of living to please, my earthly father, it's just making me bitter and frustrated. And I need a different motivation in life. Or the yoke of the American dream has left me feeling, comfortable but largely unfulfilled. So what yoke do you put on? And so the people are listening to the sermon, and that's what they're wrestling with as they listen to Jesus, the rabbi. Now, the Sermon on the Mount consists of 107 verses. And in introducing this series and preparing us to go through this teaching of Jesus, I've tried to identify what would be a theme verse, a key verse that we might underline in our Bible or circle. And typically you can do that, right? Like as you read a book of the Bible, or if there's a chapter or a key section, you can usually find a thesis verse, a main idea verse. And so I read through it myself a few times, and I tried to land on one or two, and then I did some commentary work to get the perspective of other people. What's a key verse here in chapters 5 through 7 that helps us to look at the rest of the message? And what I found is that really there is no widespread agreement on what that verse would be in the Sermon on the Mount. But I did land on one verse. One verse that I think is key to unlocking the other 106 verses. One verse that I think is the key to unlocking more personally God's vision for your life. And that's the very first sentence in the sermon itself. It comes in chapter 5, verse 3, where Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus says, come here, I want to tell you the secret to unlocking my vision for your life. Do you want to be happy? Well, yeah, I think we would all say, yes, I want to be happy. I want to be blessed. Where do we start with that? All right, well, here it is. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And immediately that confronts a much different way than most of us have learned to think and live. You just take the very first words there. Blessed are the poor. Wait, what? Now some of you are thinking like, awesome, because I'm broke, and so this is good news of great joy. I don't have anything, so I must be blessed. Well, the truth is that for most of us in our culture, in our Western world, the yoke of our Western world is not blessed are the poor, it's blessed are the rich. We just intuitively do this. We connect the word blessed with being rich. We use those words, in fact, interchangeably. That's how close the connection is in the yoke of America. And so you go over to a rich person's house, and it's incredible. This beautiful mansion. And you walk in and you say, man, this house is incredible. And the rich person doesn't say, thanks, I'm so rich. That'd be inappropriate. No, the rich person says, thanks, I'm so blessed. It's because we connect blessing with wealth. Now, I want to be careful here, because this isn't just speaking, it's not necessarily about money when Jesus says, blessed are the poor. It's poor in spirit. And so blessed are the poor isn't necessarily about money, but it's not necessarily about, it's not necessarily not about money either. I mean, you read through the Gospels and it's hard not to conclude that those who are monetarily poor have a spiritual head start in learning to trust God and be dependent upon Him. But there are two words in the Greek language for the word poor. One word speaks primarily to a person's financial state, and then the other word is used here, and it goes beyond a monetary description. The word, in fact, translated poor here, could also be translated as blessed are the powerless, blessed are the helpless, blessed are the afflicted and the needy, blessed are the lacking. It's a deeper state of poverty than just financial. And so Jesus says, you know, here's where my vision for you begins. Blessed are those who are powerless and helpless and needy. Who's in? Oh, that's a hard sell. It's a hard sell because when we think of our vision for our life, this is kind of the opposite of what we want, right? I think it's safe to say that most of us are pursuing a path that goes in the complete opposite direction of poor in spirit. We want people to think that we are rich in spirit, that we're strong enough and clever enough and creative enough and capable enough. I mean, that's the yoke of our world. Blessed are the rich in spirit. It's not blessed are the helpless, it's blessed are the capable. It's not blessed are the needy, it's blessed are those who don't need anything. It's blessed are the independent. I mean, there are no awards at athletic banquets for being poor in spirit. Well, I don't know, there might be these days when I think about it a little bit. But as far as I know, there's no official poor in spirit award. There's no place on the resume for poor in spirit. I mean, no politician runs on the platform of poor in spirit. That's just not a thing, right? Like if you made a New Year's resolution, I'm guessing that not very many people said, 2025 is going to be the year of the poor in spirit. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to become poor in spirit. And yet, this is where Jesus' vision for your life begins. And this isn't something you can skip over. In fact, should you try to skip over being poor in spirit, then the rest of His vision for your life will become nothing but frustration. And so what's it mean? I mean, what's it look like to be poor in spirit? Well, the way I want to kind of frame this up is by saying that I think that there are three things that someone who is poor in spirit will say every day of 2025. Three things that someone who is poor in spirit will say every day. And one thing they will say is, I can't. I can't. This is where it begins. It's a humbling of yourself, a recognition of your need, a daily dependence that says, I can't. I can't. And I can't is like the polar opposite of rich in spirit. If you're reading any self-help books to start your new year, one of the constant themes of a self-help book would be positive self-talk. You say some things to yourself about yourself. And certainly positive self-talk is not unbiblical. The Bible would teach us this, but it just needs to be based on God's truth about us and not a humanistic approach. And I was reading some, different self-help books and gathering some examples of statements that they would encourage you to say on a regular basis. And so here are just a few of them that I jotted down. You start off every day and you say, you look in the mirror and you say, I'm confident and I'm capable. Or you say, I'm strong enough. I have what it takes. My life is unfolding beautifully. Yeah, just keep telling yourself that, My life is unfolding beautifully. I'm deserving and worthy of every good thing. And so you just tell yourself this again and again and again. And those who are poor in spirit would say, I'm not capable. I'm not strong enough. I don't have what it takes. I'm not worthy. I can't save myself. I can't redeem my mess. I can't change myself. I can't. Now, when you hear that, at first it might seem a little bit discouraging, okay? Great, we're all going to walk out of here feeling defeated and ready to quit. Well, hang on just a minute. This is just the first thing you say, I can't. It's where it begins. And it's especially hard for us to have this type of attitude of kind of this humble self-awareness when the yoke of our culture is, keep up appearances at all costs, that, look good, put on a good front, don't let people really see the struggles, airbrush it as much as necessary. Maybe one of my favorite news stories that came out back in 2024, I don't know if you saw this or not, but a family posted their picture, their family picture, where they had a professional photographer take their family picture and airbrush it. And they just airbrushed it to death, right? Like, I don't know exactly what went through the photographer's mind, but the photographer starts to fix it, and then he tries to fix it a little bit more. And now the faces have to match, and it just ends up being, well, you see it. Some of you are going to be visited by these people in your nightmares tonight. Like, it's really, as you look at it, kind of disturbing. And so the wife, who I assume is the person standing in this photo, the wife posts these pictures online, and she had a great attitude about it, didn't mention the photographer's name or anything like that. In fact, she wasn't even trying to get their money back because they said they certainly had gotten their money's worth in just the comical relief of it. So this was their official family photograph for 2024. And yet, that's what a lot of us do, right? We have our picture. And it may not be to that extreme, but this is what we do. We just, we put out this version of ourselves that isn't real. And then we feel like we have to live up to it. And so saying, I can't, or expressing dependence or brokenness, well, we set ourselves up for a very difficult time of being honest. And yet the Bible tells us that when we humble ourselves, that's when we receive God's strength. When we intentionally humble ourselves, not when we are humbled. Jesus says in Luke 18, humble yourself and you will be exalted. And so this is key to the vision Jesus has for your life. It's not that you're going to live a life of insignificance and insecurity. It's that to live a life of significance and confidence, it begins by letting go of your pride and opening up your hands so God can give you His strength and His power. It's opening up your hand and letting go of what other people think so God can give you His help. This is why Paul says, I delight in my weakness because when I'm weak, God's strength can be demonstrated. The weaker I am, or the weaker I recognize myself to be, the more space, the more margin there is for God to show His power. I love the way that the Message paraphrases verse 3 when it says, "You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God." And so this is the key to unlocking God's vision for your life. It's that you begin by saying, "I can't." And then the second thing I think, people who are poor in spirit say every day to God is they say to God, "God, you can. I can't, you can." And this is a recognition of God's power, of God's strength, of what God can do. You can't, but God can. And there's just incredible freedom in this. And this is what God is waiting for some of you to do. He's waiting for some of you to say, "I can't. Like the yoke I'm wearing, it isn't working. I need something different. I can't. But God, you can." And there are a lot of examples in the Old Testament that you could point to where God begins to unfold His vision for somebody's life only when they reach the point where they say, "Okay, I can't. God, you can." I think Moses would be a prime example of this, where Moses believes that his vision, the vision for his life is to free the people from slavery in Egypt. And Moses has some power. He's in a position of significance. And he one day kills an Egyptian soldier. And then he's forced to flee, and he lives on the backside of the desert for like 40 years. And he gets to a place where he just can't. He's kind of accepted, "Okay, I guess, this is my life." But then one day he's out and there's a bush that's burning, but the Bible says the bush is not consumed. And so Moses walks over to get a closer look, and God speaks to him, and God says, "Here's my vision for your life, Moses. I want you to go to Egypt and free people out of slavery." And I mean, that was what Moses wanted all along, but now he knows. I mean, he just can't do it. He doesn't have what it takes. And so that's what he says to God. God says, "I want you to go tell Pharaoh, let my people go." And the first thing Moses says is, "I can't." And the way he puts it is, "I'm not a good speaker. I'm not good at talking and stuff like that." And so God immediately responds, not by saying, "Yes, you can. Don't talk that way, Moses. Moses, repeat after me, I'm capable and my life is unfolding beautifully." That's not what happens, right? Instead, what God says to Moses is, "Moses, I made your tongue." "Well, I'm not a good speaker." "Well, I made your tongue, and so it's going to work out, right? I can't, but God, you can." But he had to get to the place of "I can't" so he could say, "God, you can." And then he had a front row seat to watch what God could do. And maybe that's what needs to happen in your life. Maybe you feel that God's calling you, leading you to undertake a certain task for His kingdom. And you share those feelings with a trusted friend or family member, and they say to you, "Hey, do you really feel like you're ready for this?" And there's always a little tone to it, like they've decided, you're not ready for this, right? "Hey, do you feel ready for this?" And there's a pressure to say, yeah, just put me in, coach. I'm ready for this. But that's not true. And you know that. In your heart, I'm not ready. And it's not a false humility to say it. I'm not academically as qualified as other people. I don't feel certainly as spiritually qualified as others. I don't feel talented or gifted enough. I mean, are you ready for this? No, I'm not. But what I found is that there are other people who ask that same question, but they say it differently. And so some people say, "Do you feel ready for this?" And then the other way I hear this worded is, "Hey, do you feel confident about this?" And that's a different question. Yeah, I do actually. Okay, so do you feel ready? No. Do you feel confident? Yeah, I do. Well, how's that work? I mean, how do you not feel ready, but you do feel confident? Well, I can't. So no, I'm not ready, but God can. And so, yeah, I'm pretty confident, right? And this is what we see throughout Scripture, that this is what God wants for us. And you know, what I'm discovering is that there's just a lot of freedom in that. It feels good. I'm not going to lie, it feels good to say, yeah, no, really, I'm not. And that takes a ton of weight off. Blessed are those who can say that. But having confidence in God is, and knowing it's by His power. It's not our strength or our might, it's by God's power. One of my favorite A.W. Tozer quotes goes like this: "A low view of God is the cause of 100 lesser evils. A high view of God is a solution to 10,000 problems." A low view of God. You wonder why you're struggling with what you're struggling with? Well, for a lot of us, it comes down to this. There's just not much faith there. It's just a low view of God. You vastly underestimate what God is capable of. You don't believe in His strength and His grace, that it's sufficient. And God will fill up whatever empty space you have, whatever empty container you have. If you think God's only capable of filling up a cup, then okay, that's what He'll fill up. But if you think God is capable of filling up a semi truck, He'll fill the semi up. A high view of God is the solution to 10,000 problems. It's saying, I can't, but you can. And then the third thing a person who is poor in spirit will say every day is, God, please help me. Please help me. I was reading a survey asking people, what's your favorite Bible verse? And I was looking at, like the top 10 answers. And one of the top 10 answers was, cleanliness is next to godliness, which, sorry, that's not even in the Bible. It's something that your mom told you so you would take a bath. That's it, though. It sounds biblical, but yeah. But one of the other ones that caught my attention, people's favorite Bible verse, and this website wasn't even showing the fact that it's not in the Bible. Just, one of people's favorite Bible verses is, God helps those who help themselves. Yeah, well, that's not in there either. In fact, what would be more accurate is, God helps those who can't help themselves and know it. You want to know who God helps? God helps those who are humble and contrite in spirit. You want to know who God runs to? God doesn't run to the powerful who say, hey, I got this, I can help myself. God runs to the person who says, I don't have it. I need your help. I need your power. The moment we become poor in spirit and say, I can't, God, you can, please help us, is the moment that God begins to help us walk in His vision for our life and for our ministry. And so, I don't know, as we start this new year, I don't know what what plays need to be under review. I do know that as we begin this new year, we tend to think about these things. And some of you are reading books. Some of you will go to a conference, or some of you will see a counselor, and that's all good. Those are all good things there. But every day in 2025, what would happen if you got down on your knees and you said, I can't. You can. Please help me.